Hi everyone, this is Jamie Nelson from Manhattan Prep coming to you today to do a little work with you on sentence correction. We will talk about some methods for sentence correction. First, a brief intro about myself. I live in Houston, Texas, and I have taught the GMAT about 15 years. Official scores ranging from 770 to 800. I will confess the 800 was from a while ago. So the 770 is my more recent score. I am going to do my best today to do all the technical stuff. Please bear with me as this is my first time presenting in this platform. But I think that we'll have an interesting lesson about sentence correction. And once we're done, I am happy to come back here and take as many questions as you would like. You can ask me about the presentation, anything in it. We're going to be doing a very difficult sentence correction question, so it would not surprise me if you have some questions about that. I'm also happy to take questions about any aspect of the GMAT and GMAT preparations. So be it math, verbal, integrated reasoning, essay, or just general questions about the GMAT, please save those and I will be happy to take them from you. I think that this will take about 20 to 25 minutes to go through our presentation, and then we will come back here and have questions. So thank you so much for being with me today, and let's get started. All right, you should now hopefully be able to see my entire screen. There it is. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to talk about today are methods for sentence correction. Sentence correction is I wouldn't say it's the dominant part of the verbal section, but of the three, it is the part of the verbal that does contain the highest number of questions. About 15 to 17 problems out of the 41, about 1 minute and 20 seconds per problem on average. If you've never done sentence correction before, you'll get a good sense of what it's about today. It's heavily weighted towards grammar, so knowing grammar is very important. You will also have some reading comprehension on the GMAT. This is very similar to what you will see on the SAT, in which you read a passage of anywhere from one very long paragraph to 4 shorter paragraphs and answer about 3 to 4 questions per passage. In addition, you'll also have critical reasoning, one of my favorite parts of the GMAT. It's very good for those of you who like to argue with people. If you love to argue and debate and get into it with people like that, you will love critical reasoning, because critical reasoning is really about reading someone's argument and then strengthening it, weakening it, identifying assumptions, drawing inferences from it, and so forth. What you can expect on sentence correction is something like this. Now, this is an extremely simple question that you will not have when you actually do the GMAT. So please brace yourself for much, much more difficult sentences. But you will always get a sentence, and part of it will be underlined. It could be as little as 1 word, or it could be the entire sentence that is underlined. And I know from working with many students over the years, that is often what people dread, is getting a sentence correction in which the entire thing is underlined. In addition, you will have 5 answer choices, and we can see these down below. A will always be a repeat of what is already in the sentence. So if you think the sentence is best left alone, you would want to choose A. If you think that it's faulty in any way, then you'd want to choose one of the other answer choices. All will be different. So your task is to go through and decide which one is the best replacement for that underlined part. And please keep in mind that you don't want to always make a correction. 1/5 of the time, A will be the best choice. So out of the approximately 15 to 17 questions that you get on the GMAT, you will probably choose about 3 to 4 A's. And if you're wondering what the answer is for this one, it is D. Since we have carrots and beets, those create a plural subject, and we would have to have a plural verb that matches up with it. Because of that, I could strike out B and C, and then I go with what's left, A, D, and E, and D just has the best idiomatic expression for this particular sentence. To talk about what sentence correction tests, I really think of sentence correction as being primarily about grammar. If you don't know grammar, don't worry, you really can learn it in the amount of time that it takes to prepare for the GMAT. The grammar covered consists of topics that you undoubtedly covered in high school. Subject-verb agreement, modifiers is very important, parallelism, another one that's huge. Modifiers and parallelism are probably the two most prevalently tested topics in sentence correction. Subject-verb agreement also shows up quite a bit. And then some of these lesser topics, such as verb tenses, you may remember present perfect, past perfect, pronouns. Pronouns are actually a very easy grammar topic to learn, but they can be a very hard grammar topic on the test to actually catch. So I always advise my students to spend a lot of extra time on pronouns. Idioms, which are kind of annoying little rules of the English language, which are difficult to study for. But the GMAT does expect that you know how certain expressions are to be properly constructed. And then finally, just a little bit of connecting punctuation. The GMAT likes to see that you know how to use a semicolon, for example, or sometimes they'll test a colon. Along with grammar, it's important to understand the meaning of the sentence. And meaning is something that the GMAT has increasingly been testing on the sentence correction questions. So you just have to make sure that the meaning is clear and that it makes sense. And you want to stick with the original meaning of the sentence if you can. As long as that meaning is clear and is logical, and answer choices that contain that meaning are free of grammatical errors. I would consider grammatical errors as my trump card in sentence correction. This is just a quick pop quiz for you to just go through and see, can I find errors in these? And if you can, I'd just like you to make a note on your paper and then write what is the error. And if you cannot find an error, that's fine too. Let me give you about 30 seconds to read through and make your notes. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to do this by now, and you found errors in here because there are definitely errors in here. The first one, I have a pronoun error. I'm using the word he, but it's unclear who he is. Is Adam the one crying because he's so upset at being defeated by Tom? Or is Tom the one who's crying because he's never beaten Adam before and he's just so overjoyed to have finally beaten Adam? The GMAT would not find this an acceptable construction, so you would need to change this he and make it very clear who it is that this he is referring to. The second one is really a hot mess, and hopefully you saw this as well. Yesterday I went to the store. Okay, that's fine. You went to the store yesterday, past tense verb, and will buy some milk. Wait a minute, will buy is future tense. How can I do something in the future that I've already done? Well, unless I have a time machine, I am probably not able to do that, so we have a serious verb tense issue. We'd have to correct our verb tenses. The third one is okay. Now, you may look at this and think, well, I would say, and then you may have your own sentence in mind. And it's important to not get too caught up in, well, I would write this sentence this way. because sentence correction is really not about the ultimate way to write a sentence. It's more about, is the sentence grammatically correct and does it make sense and have a clear meaning? And as long as the sentence meets those standards, the sentence can be an acceptable sentence correction construction. And finally, we have a very strange sentence here. We have a real meaning issue. This misplaced modifier, who barked and wagged his tail, appears to be trying to describe the dog, because I know boys can bark, but I have not seen a lot of boys with tails. However, this modifier is not next to the noun it's modifying. If I wanted to switch this sentence and make it acceptable, I would say, the boy played with the dog who barked and wagged his tail. And that way it's very clear who it is barking and wagging the tail. It's the dog. So just a quick reminder on modifiers. Anything that is describing a noun has to sit as closely to that noun as possible. So just kind of keep that in mind as you study for the GMAT and you do sentence correction. The GMAT loves to have misplaced, also known as dangling modifiers. So just watch out for those. If something is describing a noun, that noun must be as close to that description as possible. And we can see here, yes, 3 of these were incorrect, 1 was correct, and we had pronouns, verb tenses, and modifier errors here. I have a sentence for you to do that is quite difficult. I'm really giving you kind of the toughest sentence I have in my files. So you may be cursing me right now, which I accept your curses, but I'd like you to give this a shot anyway. This sentence was written by our company. It is not an official GMAT question. I chose it because I think it's literally as hard as anything that the GMAT could possibly put together. And I also think that it has some great learning lessons in it. So I'd like you to give it a shot. Now, for a typical sentence correction question, you would take about 1 minute and 20 seconds. For this one, I actually plan to give you about 2 minutes. So I'd like you to just take a shot at it, see what you can come up with, and then we will talk about a process to do this problem with, and we'll come back and look at what the correct answer is. So please do try this for 2 minutes. Here you go. Okay, hopefully you have an answer at this point. If you would not have an answer, it would probably be time about now to just, make a guess. And on the GMAT, timing is incredibly important. If you've ever taken the actual GMAT, you know that if you run out of time on the test without answering questions, your score will take an enormous hit. So it can be good to just get in the pattern of my time is up, I'm going to make my best guess and move on. That actually allows you to maximize your potential GMAT score. So if you'll go ahead, write down your answer, or if you don't have an answer, your best guess. We will come back and go through this in just a bit. But for now, let's go ahead to the sentence correction 4-step process. So step 1 is one that is not particularly intuitive to most students, but one that actually I would say most very good test takers naturally use. And that is called take a first glance. So rather than read the sentence first, we actually suggest that you scan down the answers first to see if you have any, any differences jump out at you right away. Now, I might be scanning down and I might see the difference. I've got 2 examples. I've got coined twice, and then I do have tulipomania. As I continue to scan down, I also might see that my verb, I've got 3 include, and I've got also an includes and an included. Now, if I have a split like that, a 3 of one, and then 1 and 1 of 2 others, generally on the GMAT majority will rule. So I would probably keep in mind, you know what, the right answer is probably in that cluster of include. The GMAT tends to like to build camouflage around their correct answers in the hopes of snaring people into wrong answers by just creating answer choices that are very similar but are not correct. And then one other difference that you might see, which will actually turn out to be a very important difference, is this difference between and as well as. So I'm actually going to circle this one. This one will come back to be a very important difference. So I've got and here, and I've got as well as here. And if you were in my class, my students could probably tell you, Jamie says the most important word in sentence correction is the word and, which I'm going to put some bright lights around it here in answer choice A. So you can see it is the star of the show. You know, it should really have its own marquee in sentence correction. The reason that and is so important on the GMAT is that it is the #1 parallelism marker in sentence correction. It is the most important word in sentence correction, to be clear. Not in the rest of the GMAT, but in sentence correction. And then I have to think, okay, what is parallelism? Well, parallelism just means that 2 or more things who have an equal role in the sentence are expressed the same way. That they are, so for instance, I like running and swimming. I would want running and swimming to be expressed the same way. I like running, swimming, and hiking. Those 3 elements are all equal in the sentence. I would want to express them with the same form. So we will come back and look at this and as well as split, but because if we know that and is our #1 marker of parallelism, then whenever we see it, we should always check parallelism, because parallelism is tested in over half of sentence correction questions. So anytime you see it, you want to immediately snap to and check the parallelism associated with it. So from our first scan down, we've gotten some really valuable info. This first part we're really not sure about. I'm not sure about this. The verb, I can say, well, I've got 3 include, and then I've got an includes and included. You know, it's probably going to be one of the include. And then I have this very useful difference with and as well as. So we'll come back in and do more with this. But even before I've read the sentence, I've already got a template in my mind of what I might be dealing with in this problem. So then I can more actively read the sentence, looking for things that might be useful. I can be looking for potential grammar errors in the sentence because I've done this scan down first of all. Well, second, then I'm going to read for meaning. So now I'm going to go back to this sentence and read it, and it says, examples of tulipomania, a term coined from the tulip craze of the 17th century in the Netherlands, include speculative bubbles in South Seas trading rights in the 1720s, Victorian real estate in the 1880s, the US stock market in the 1920s, and the obsession for Beanie Babies in the 1990s. Okay, this is a difficult sentence to understand. But if we think about it, all right, let's see. I've got this term called tulipomania, and it's used when there are speculative bubbles. Okay, so let me think. What is a speculative bubble? Let's see. Well, it's an economic term. It means that people think that some item is going to be worth more in the future, so they keep paying a higher and higher price for it. And the most recent speculative bubble that we've had here in the United States is oil. If you remember, 2 years ago, oil was up to about $130, $40 a barrel. And then it, eventually, so people kept, buying futures contracts on oil, thinking that the price would just go up and up and up. But what happened is, as oil got more and more pricey, production kicked in more and more, and there were alternative ways to get oil. And eventually, the supply started to overwhelm the demand, and the price plunged. It was as low as, I believe, $25 a barrel. Earlier this year. And I live in an oil area, so this is pretty relevant to me. So a speculative bubble just means, people are paying more and more for something, but eventually people stop paying the current price and say, all right, that price is ridiculous. I am not going to pay it. And then once people stop buying, the price suddenly plunges down. And about 8 years ago, we saw this in the housing market in the US. Houses were way overpriced, people stopped buying, and then house prices dropped through the floor, leading to the recession that we had back in 2009. So I read this and I think, okay, there were speculative bubbles here. Okay, and it gives me 4 examples of things in which I had speculative bubbles. Now that I've looked at my differences, I've read for meaning, okay, I know what the sentence is about. Now I try to find a starting point with these differences. And if I can tackle it, well, then I go ahead and make eliminations, and then I move on to a new starting point. If I can't tackle it, then I go back and try to find something else. So maybe I had decided that my starting point was here with examples. But I start going through that and I start saying, you know what, I'm not really seeing much of a difference there. I don't have any hard grammar rules to make eliminations with. And then I proceed on and I think, well, do I really want to tackle a 3-1-1 split? Maybe, but the problem is I've got 3 different things going on. I've got all the include, I've got the includes, and I've got the included. The best kind of split is a 3-2 split where you have 3 answers one way and 2 answers the other way. And the one that we had with that is here with the and as well as. So I'm going to go back to that. And the other thing that's great about this split is that if I've done my studying, I know that and is a very meaningful word on the GMAT. So I look at that and I say, okay, I know that and creates parallelism. That's great. Is there parallelism going on here? Well, there appear to be 4 things that are being put together. Now, what I'm going to do to help me get ready to check this parallelism, I'm going to cross this modifier out on the screen. And unfortunately on the GMAT, you can't actually use this pen that I'm using now, but you'd want to take it out in your mind. And you just want to get into the core of the sentence, which is right here. Examples of tulipomania include speculative bubbles in. Okay, well, let's see what the speculative bubbles are in. Well, here's number one, in trading rights. Okay, I could have a speculative bubble in trading rights. Let's go to the next one. Real estate. Okay, I could have a speculative bubble in real estate. Yeah, I mean, we just had that here recently. The stock market. Yeah, I mean, we had a speculative bubble in the stock market back in the late 90s, around 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst. And there was a lot of economic loss after that. And, okay, so there's the star of my show. Let's pay close attention to it. And the obsession for Beanie Babies. So this is number 4. And whenever I teach this to my students, I say, you guys are probably too young to remember the whole Beanie Baby craze. And they all say, no, we collected Beanie Babies. I still have my Beanie Babies. So many of you watching this probably still have your Beanie Babies too. Hopefully they're still worth some money. But I want to ask myself, wait a minute, do all 4 of these things really go together? I can have a speculative bubble in trading rights, I can have one in real estate, and I can have one in a stock market. All of those are areas in which people can buy and sell things. But can I actually have a speculative bubble in the obsession for Beanie Babies? Were people ever buying and selling the obsession for Beanie Babies? And hopefully you're at home right now saying, no, there was never a speculative market in the obsession for Beanie Babies. And once I see that, I say, you know what? There is no way that these 4 can all be joined together in a parallel form. I have to eliminate everything that uses the word and. Now, this is where you have to be careful. When I use this problem in my classes, almost everyone misses it. It's very unusual that someone gets it right. And the reason is that they are all thinking parallelism, but they're thinking just structural parallelism. Meaning, oh, I have 4 nouns. Okay, 4 nouns can go together. But parallelism can't be only structural, it has to also be logical. You have to have, if you're creating a parallel structure, the items in that structure, the parallel elements, have to logically belong together. And that's a much trickier call to make, and it's also a higher level piece of grammar the GMAT could test you on. So if you always check with parallelism, not only are your elements in the same form, but do they logically go together, you can get some very difficult questions correct. So once I say, well, you know, I really don't want the obsession with the other 3, I have to split it off. Well, here's what's going to ride to our rescue. It's as well as. In case you had any doubt, as well as is not a parallelism marker. It does not create parallelism with the other elements that it's with. In fact, it splits things off. So I really have a choice between B and C. Now, if you know your grammar, you should be eyeballing C going, that is not good. And it is not indeed. Look at how we have this long opening phrase followed by a comma. I call this the number 1 modifier error. You can think of it as an opening modifier, but the GMAT loves to use this construction. They've been using it for as long as I've been teaching, which has been quite a long time. So they will start a sentence with a long opening phrase that's describing some noun. You know, the opening phrase should make you think who or what. So I read this, coined from the 17th century tulip craze in the Netherlands, and I think what? What was coined from the 17th century tulip craze? Well, whatever it is, it must be sitting right after. Because remember, noun modifiers must sit next to the nouns they modify, and we know it was not actually examples that were coined. It was tulipomania. So this is wrong. And as soon as I can catch this, I can say, okay, I know this is wrong. I've got to get rid of it. And the only thing I have left is B. The important thing to remember on verbal, the higher you go in verbal, the more that you'll have to use a strategy of 4 wrongs make a right. Just try to do 4 eliminations and then go with whatever's left standing. You don't have to like it. You don't have to be able to understand it. You don't have to know all the words in it. You just choose whatever is left after you've made 4 eliminations. The last time I took the GMAT, I got a 99th percentile verbal. And I did that by often choosing answers that I found completely bewildering. They were so hard I couldn't even understand them, but I knew that I had crossed off 4 answers, and thus that had to be the one. So don't ever shy away from choosing something that you're a little bit uncomfortable with. As long as you've made good eliminations, you should be in very good shape. All right, so this one was B, and this would be as close to an 800 level problem as would exist in sentence correction, but I hope this made sense. We can certainly come back to it in our Q&A process. So just to recap, this is our 4-step process for sentence correction. The thing that most people forget to do is to take that first glance. And I really want you to encourage you as you're practicing to try practicing that. You'll have a very different experience if you take that first glance and you already know, oh, I can see the word and. I know that that involves parallelism. Let me start reading for parallelism. It's a very different experience. You're going to be quite a ways ahead when you then read the sentence than if you're just kind of passively reading the sentence and then trying to find mistakes later. So with that said, I thank you all for your attention. I am going to exit out of this, go back to the room, and I will be happy to take any questions that you have about sentence correction or the GMAT in general. And here I am. Hopefully that was interesting. I will take any questions. Suvik, if you'd like to load any of the questions. Okay, great question here. How would you approach really small sentence questions? So the sentence itself was very small, or the underlined portion was very small? I'm not quite certain what that is. So let me answer both of those. If it's a very short sentence, obviously there's a lot of challenges to that because you don't have as many obvious things to eliminate. Something like that is probably, it sounds like they're testing out experimental questions for a future GMAT when I think about something like that. It's probably having to deal with idioms is one of my guesses, because a really short sentence probably would not have a lot of differences in it. So it's probably idioms. I've also seen shorter sentences when they are testing meaning. So I would just keep kind of an eye out for the meaning also. Oh, differences between as and just as. Yeah, they are enjoying testing that sort of thing more and more. And extremely subtle differences, yes. So that's going to get to idiomatic phrasing. It's going to get to meaning, which, you know, as, just as has some meaning implications. And you're just going to really have to know your stuff there. I wish that I could tell you there will be a lot of good eliminations, but there probably will not be. How do I pick a split in a long sentence correction question? What a great question. The most important thing I do when I scan down is I don't just fixate on the first split that I see. The GMAT knows that people are going to look for splits, but they also know that people are going to be naturally drawn to a split right at the beginning. So sometimes they'll put kind of red herring splits in there, which, you know, don't really mean anything. Either way is totally fine to distract you from much better splits later on. So the thing I would keep doing is I'd keep going vertically down throughout as you kind of look through the sentence, and keep in mind often your best split is right at the end of your answer choices. That's a great question. Oh my gosh. So the question is, if you had limited time, which section would you recommend preparing the most for? I'm going to give you an answer of that depends. So there are two different cases. Obviously, I would either prepare for quant or for verbal. I would not prepare for essay. I would not prepare for integrated reasoning. I would prepare for either quant and verbal. Let me give you the case for either one, and you can decide what your situation is. The case for preparing for quant is, one, the schools care a lot about your quant score if you don't have a quantitative background. One of the biggest considerations the school has is, can you finish their program and can you hack the math that you'll have to do to get through their courses? So if you have an engineering or a math background or maybe even a finance background, your quant may be a little less important because you've already shown that you can do that kind of work than if you're more of a liberal arts major or social sciences major like me. I would need to demonstrate to the school that I can do their math. So if you don't have a strong quant background, you may want to focus your efforts on math. The other reason to focus on quant is that it is probably easier to improve in a short period of time than verbal is. And there's lots of just great alternative quant techniques, such as plugging in smart numbers, working backwards, meaning testing answer choices, that you can use in problem solving. In data sufficiency, if you can use a really robust process and get good at guessing techniques, and then also rephrasing, simplifying the question, and testing numbers in the statements, you can make a lot of strides there. That said, I also want to make a case for verbal, because I find one of the biggest mistakes people make in studying is they do not prepare enough for verbal. So here's the typical scenario that happens. I see a student, I do a lot of assessments after the test or after our course ends, and I try to figure out how to get people a score boost as quickly as possible. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I go and analyze practice tests, and I often find situations in which people have a 50th percentile quant score and they have a 70th percentile verbal score. And I'll see that their quant score has improved over our course, but their verbal score has stayed the same. And I will say, you know, why hasn't your verbal moved at all? And the person will say, well, I really want a 700, but you know, I know I'm fine with my verbal. My verbal's at 70th percentile, so I just put all my time and energy into quant. And I have to break the bad news to them. Guess what? If you want a 700, a 90th percentile score, it's very important to have a high verbal. It's almost impossible to get a 700 without having a very high verbal. If you want a 700, your verbal needs to be in the 90s percentile and hopefully as high as you can push it within the 90s. So if you're shooting for a high score, especially if you're shooting for a 720, 730 or above, you basically have to have a high verbal. There's no way around it. So I would consider studying verbal if my quant were already in pretty good shape and my verbal was kind of lingering in the 70s to around 80, and I was shooting for a 700 or better, then I would probably focus on verbal. Okay, next question. This is a good question. These are great questions, everybody. Thank you. Reading comp is the hardest to improve. Do you agree? I do. I think reading comp is very hard because a lot of it is just about how quickly you read and comprehend, which is something that you've been learning your whole life. And if you're a voracious reader, then reading comp is probably going to be much easier for you than if you don't like to read. So I do think that reading comp is probably the one area in the GMAT in which your ability to do it is just more naturally hardwired in than any other potential part of the test. Oh, great question. So the next one, how much do you think test day anxiety can affect your score? Enormously. I actually wrote a chapter on test anxiety for our book called the GMAT Roadmap. I have a special interest in test anxiety because I went through a PhD program in counseling psychology back when I was teaching the GMAT for the first company that I taught for. And I've encountered students who were literally giving up 200 points on test day. Their scores would drop 200 points because of test anxiety. I had a tutoring student I worked with, I guess it was probably about 6 years ago. She would get a 720 on her practice test reliably, and then on the test day, she would go in and do a 560, 570 because of test anxiety. And once I started seeing this, I actually started doing some things that would help our students. One is I found an excellent performance psychologist who I have now had work with over 200 of our students. And we've had outstanding results with him working with our students. We've seen a lot of improvement once they work with him. His name, I'm sure he would be happy for me to give it out. His name is Dr. Michael Claybor. He's actually a personal friend of mine. When I had all these students with test anxiety, I went to him and said, will you start working with people? He's agreed, and it's now been about 4 or 5 years that he's been working with our students. His website is Claybor and Claybor, that is K-L-A-Y-B-O-R, clayborandclaybor.com. But we've had just tremendous improvements with him. He works with people over Skype. Another thing that we've suggested to people is hypnosis. And my tutoring student I was just telling you about, I actually sent her to hypnosis. She had already done cognitive behavioral therapy without results. So once she did hypnosis, she did get a 720 actual GMAT score. Another thing that we've been experimenting with lately is mindfulness recordings. We have an instructor at our company who is a meditation expert, and he put together a meditation mindfulness little recording that I've had people listen to, and that's been very helpful. So test anxiety is real. There's no shame in it. A lot of people have it. If you have it, just take steps to do something about it, because it's very difficult to make strides with test anxiety there. Okay, another great question. These are great. What would be your advice to improve from a verbal 40 to a verbal 45? Yeah, verbal 45 is really tough. You know, that's a 99th percentile score. You're going to have to be good at almost everything. You know, you can maybe miss 5 or 6 questions at a verbal 45. So of the 3 verbal areas, I think that sentence correction is the easiest to correct. So that would probably be one that I would attack the most vigorously. I would make sure to know all my sentence correction grammar rules, know as many idioms as you can. Critical reasoning, I would really work on learning how to break down the arguments. You know, what's the conclusion, what's the premise, what's the assumption, if it's an assumption family argument. If it's an evidence family argument, such as draw a conclusion or resolve a discrepancy, those are often missed by people, and it's unfortunate because I think those are some of the easiest questions to get right if you know your strategy. So I would work really serious strategy there. And then reading comp, I would really study hard on wrong answers. You know, if I chose an answer that was incorrect, what was wrong with it that should have led me to eliminate it? How many GMAT attempts do you think is too many? That's awesome. Well, you can only take the GMAT 5 times in a 12-month period, so keep that in mind. That, you know, once you take it 5 times, you have to wait until some time has elapsed before you can take it again. Otherwise, as far as I know, the process for admissions, the committee is not sitting there going, hey, Joe Blow took the GMAT 5 times. Oh, no, we cannot admit him. My understanding of the process is that you submit your application with your best score on it. Committee looks at that application, makes the decision to admit you. They then hand your file to an administrative person in their office who accesses the GMAT database and just checks out, do you have the score that you said you did? So that person is not going to run back to the committee and say, oh no, Susie has taken the GMAT 5 times, we can't let her in. I would say take the GMAT until you have the score that will get you to a school that will help you do what you want to do professionally. How much time would you recommend for a great verbal improvement? Great question. It depends on what you consider a great verbal improvement. I think a great verbal improvement would be something like going from a 70th percentile to a 90th percentile, because once you do that, then you're kind of within striking range of a 700 overall score, as long as your math is decent. So time for that, it just kind of depends on why your verbal is low right now. If it's timing, that's something that's much more quick to fix than if it's something like you're just a slow and not very good reader. I would say at least a couple of months. A couple months would put you in good shape. Okay, I got a hilarious bonus question. Is Ron Purawal a robot? Okay, if you don't know who Ron Purawal is, he's probably the most interesting teacher at our company. I have met him in person a few times. He kind of dresses like a modern day pirate. He probably should have been born back in the 1700s. He would be like one of those landed gentry people who periodically like sails a pirate ship and takes over somebody else's ship. He's a real person. He's a very unique person. I have found you don't want to play trivia against him, because as soon as like half the question is out of the questioner's mouth, Ron will just say the answer. So Ron's a very interesting guy, and if you have not seen his Thursdays with Ron sessions, I strongly recommend them. You'll find out all sorts of interesting little things about the GMAT. Ron was actually the person who did the breakdown of sentence correction questions by grammar topic from the official guide, and Ron found that I believe it was 56% of sentence correction questions contain parallelism, which is why I really emphasize parallelism today, because it is such a strongly tested topic. So thank you for giving me that funny question about Ron. Suvik, do we have anything else that I need to answer? No? Okay. Well, thanks everybody. It was great fun to be here and take your questions. I really appreciate it. I hope that you will consider signing up for one of my trial classes. Again, I am Jamie Nelson with Manhattan Prep, and thanks so much. I hope that you learned a lot today. Take care.